So obviously the tents are going to keep me drying out the wind, so that's the shelter element covered of an evening. But how am I going to stay warm in that tent? Obviously I've got my layering system that I would have through the day, so like my insulation jacket, bits like that. But I'm not going to be very toasty if I don't have a nice warm sleeping bag to get into to retain my heat through the night. So obviously what we need is a good sleeping bag. Now, there's lots of different sleeping bags you can choose from, but we want to consider whether we have a down-filled sleeping bag, which is feather-filled, or we have a synthetic-filled sleeping bag, which is man-made material, usually some form of polyester. The benefit of the down sleeping bag, just like a down jacket, when it's filled with feathers, it's much lighter, so it packs down a lot better, it's lighter to carry, and the feathers open up nicely and provide you with a lot of heat for the size of it and the pack size. The downside of a down sleeping bag is when it gets wet and damp, the feathers stick together and they don't hold much heat, so it's not very warm when it gets wet and damp. On the flip side, we've got a synthetic bag, which is generally much bigger, much harder to pack down, or at least much bigger when it's packed down. However, when it gets wet, it still keeps you warm, and that is the benefit of a synthetic bag. So what I tend to do with my sleeping bag is, if I'm taking my down sleeping bag, what I'll tend to do is I'll place in a bivy bag, so a waterproof outer shell for my sleeping bag. And you might be wondering why I do this, because obviously I'm in a waterproof tent, but the problem is when you're in a waterproof tent, your warm, moist body heat is in there. It then condensates on the inside of the tent, you get condensation, the inside of the tent gets soaking wet, it then drips onto your sleeping bag, or if you're laid against the side of the tent, the sleeping bag just soaks it up. So a nice bivy bag means that what I can do is basically just slot this in. So that's the bivy bag over the top of the sleeping bag, and even if my bivy bag touches the inside of a damp part of the tent, at least my down sleeping bag stays dry and doesn't get sopping wet. Because the last thing you want is, if you're staying out for multiple nights, for your sleeping bag to get damp, soak up a load of water, you then stuff it away in a stuff sack, which then squishes it all together and every part of it gets wet through. So then when you get it out the following night, it's soaking wet before you even start. So by having a bivy bag over the top, it's really, really useful. One of the other benefits of having a bivy bag is it just provides you with that little bit of additional insulation as well, because it just holds the heat a little bit better. It's a hard shell essentially, so if it's windy, the wind's blowing through the tent, gives you an additional layer there to hold onto that heat so that wind doesn't blow through your sleeping bag and blow it out. Some people may use bivy bags like this just out on its own completely, so you can get away with, especially in the summer when it's much warmer, with just literally sleeping out with your sleeping bag with a bivy bag over the top. It means you don't have to take a tent. Technically this is your shelter that's covering you over, so that's really, really useful. Now, one of the other considerations with kit is obviously if we lay now on the floor with this sleeping bag, there's going to be nothing between our back and the ground, so we're going to be super, super cold. So what we need is some form of insulation between the sleeping bag and the floor, and that's in the form of a sleeping mat. Before we go into sleeping mats in the next video, one of the things to consider with the sleeping mat is that with your sleeping bag specifically, if you've got a down sleeping bag, those feathers are going to squish up behind you, so the insulation mat needs to be really, really good. Whereas in a synthetic sleeping bag, it's not as bad, it doesn't squish down as much, so you've got a little bit more insulation on a synthetic bag, but you still do need some form of insulation between you and the floor, otherwise you'll be freezing cold. So we're going to go through sleeping mats in the next video.